So, the presenter for this session is an assistant to the director and manager of conservation of the Lopez Museum and Library, where she oversees the conservation operations, policies, projects, and research. Her research interests are in technical studies of Philippine paintings, managing collection environments in tropical climates, and integrating sustainability in operations. Her projects have included a pigment analysis of a 1950s mural, integrating sustainability objectives in environmental guidelines, conservation recommendations for the design of a storage facility, and environmental studies on artworks in transit, particularly from tropical to temperate climate zones. She holds an MSc in Conservation Science Pathway from Cardiff University, a BSc in Materials Chemistry, and a BA in Art History from the University of British Columbia. Please welcome Margarita Villanueva.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many of you here today. I just wondered, how many of you work with collections in your institute, or how many of you are cultural workers? Would you raise your hand? Amazing, majority. Gab, parang you're not raising your hand. And how many of you work in collections care? Oh, quite a number. I'm so happy that you've joined here today. I'll be presenting a case study where I hope to tie in a lot of the learnings that we had this morning with Camille as well as Vincent. I had participated in the Getty Conservation Program in 2019, and so had the privilege to be able to apply some of the learnings from the program into the projects that we have at the museum. So I thought I'd start by introducing myself. I'm Margarita or Marga Villanueva. Um, I've been, as Nina mentioned, I come from a chemistry and art history background. I had initially started working in paintings conservation studios, so private laboratories in Canada. And it was only when I had a working opportunity in Italy that I worked in a museum, and mostly in operations and education. I've been with the Lopez Museum since 2012, with the exception of my taking my master's along the way. At the museum, I wear a few hats, but I thought I would focus more on what I do in the area of conservation. We have three major programs at the Lopez Museum and Library, and that's in preventive conservation, practical conservation, and conservation research. And these are areas that I lead. We primarily service, of course, the Lopez Museum and Library collection, but we also offer services to other institutions and collections. Under preventive conservation, we work a lot on documentation, storage, transit, and exhibitions. We have quite an active loans program. And in practical conservation, because of the nature of our collection, which I'll talk about shortly, we specialize in paintings, papers, and books. In terms of conservation research, we have three primary areas that are quite kind of spontaneous and largely driven by the needs that we have. We do efficacy of intervention. So I had done a study in my master's, our non-aqueous deacidification treatments on labile materials on paper, and now improving our environmental management systems. We also design conservation solutions like building our fumigation chambers, stretcher bars, etc., and do material studies, as was shared earlier. I thought I'd start by introducing our museum. The Lopez Museum and Library is a small private museum that was founded in 1960 out of a deep and abiding love of country by Eugenio Lopez Sr. And this was, after the colonial periods and World War II particularly, there were with devastating loss to museums, libraries, and archives, where we lost so much of our cultural heritage, our founder felt there was a dire need for historical continuity. And he did that by first putting together our library. He would approach antiquarian booksellers all over the world and repatriate volumes back. Our oldest book is 1524, so a little over 100 years old, which documents the voyage of Magellan. Um, and since then, we have been expanding the collection. I thought, though, that I would share these words from the son of our founder, who also took a very close role in our collection. He would say that in a letter that he wrote to his father while he was doing the acquisitions of our collection, he said, "Herein lies the value of a good Filipiniana library today, for it provides our intellectuals with the means not only to rediscover, but to create a new image of the Filipino people." Our collection today has expanded into the fine arts. Our collections comprises manuscripts, periodicals, photographs, Rizaliana, as well as some pre-colonial pottery, a modest, very modest collection, and a fine arts collection that begins in the 1800s with particular monographic collections of Juan Luna and Hidalgo, and proceeds to the modern period with select acquisitions in contemporary art. So by volume, see, our collection is largely hygroscopic, which means they retain moisture. They easily absorb and retain moisture, which, as my colleagues Vincent and Camille explained, poses tremendous to the degradation and conservation of the materials. Being in the tropical zone, things happen much quicker here, and I'm sure you've all seen that in your own homes. Your old notebooks are probably a little bit, and you put boxing and brown stains, and even textiles, maybe the old barongs of parents or of those that you've inherited. And so this is an area where, there's not a lot of written research on, and so has become a bit of an occupation of mine, um, and that I've been hyper focused on. So as Camille showed through her Pag-asa references, on average, Manila is actually at about 78.4 relative humidity throughout the year. We don't fluctuate that much. We're not in four seasons, but what it means is we're extremely hot and extremely humid year round. And this took a toll on our collection. Deterioration of the Lopez collection was first noticed in the 1970s at the original site in Lancaster Building by Manila Bay at Pasay, where many books and works on paper became noticeably brown, brittle, and warped. Paintings became cracked, and mold was a common occurrence. Um, I should share that some of my slides are from projects that we've worked on for other institutions. So we haven't had this much mold at Lopez, but it's something that we often treat and see in other collections which might be relevant to you. We noticed, so this is an image that describes mold. And in this slide, I show some deterioration that we've seen on account of incorrect humidity and incorrect temperature. Above, you see an old map of Manila Bay that became noticeably brown and brittle over time because of acid hydrolysis. And you see a painting that experienced mechanical damage. By that, we mean cracks. I'm sure you've seen cracks in paintings before, and it's sort of lifting a little bit from the canvas and sometimes flaking. So these are very common conditions that we come across, and that was quite prevalent at the Lancaster building where we opened in 1960. Because of the condition, or it was a big driver anyway, the collection was moved inland to the Ben Press building in Ortigas Center. I see a few familiar faces here in the crowd that I know has spent time with us. So at BenPress, this is where our environmental management systems really began and where conservation for us was institutionalized. We moved to BenPress in 1986 and we stayed there till 2018. So when I started to think about our conservation needs today, I really looked at our information from this site because this is where our collection spent the most time, 32 years. Truly the historic conditions of the collection. An added dimension to our move to BenPress is we weren't only taking care of the library and painting collections that we already had, but we expanded programming into contemporary art, which, as you know, can mean anything. So I thought I would show this slide of one exhibition we did where there was soil in the gallery. We often deal with organic materials, and so we're always having to take into consideration a lot of the preventive needs, especially since they're displayed alongside our collection. This slide is a recall of Vincent's slide earlier to show what the environmental guidelines were like in BenPress. At the time, under our conservation consultant, in the 1990s, climate control, as mentioned earlier, was rooted in international practice that became a standard. It was a practice designed for temperate climates like North America and Europe. But because it became adopted by the international community, it was assumed that that was the ideal conditions for the materials. But even as early as then, being unequipped to meet such conditions, our conservation consultant, Maita Reyes, recommended that what she termed acceptable parameters at the Lopez Museum, targeting a more sustainable 22 plus or minus 3. So you can see it's slightly higher, but still sort of within range. This is the temperature here below. But what's significant is that we were always a bit higher in terms of relative humidity at 60 plus or minus 5%. And this was because we often had power interruptions in the 1990s, particularly. Um, and also, um, we were really conscious of mitigating mold. So we were a little conservative. We wanted to be a bit warmer, but weren't sure how much more humid we could be. So these were our conditions. And just to give you a sense of the significance of it, our climate targets means that it's about if we were to have used international practice during, the summer months, it would have been a 22% difference from the outdoor environment to the indoor, which could have caused, damage beyond 20%. As you saw from the risk chart that and table that Vincent presented, you're in the high risk zone, and even worse during the rainy season with a 34% difference. So what I ended up doing is revisiting environmental guidelines in 2018. Now, this was driven by an institutional need. We were actually leaving BenPress. We were going to build a new offsite storage facility. And so, of course, we got excited. And, the conservation team, facilities, everyone was like, we can do it better. We can finally build the most ideal, purpose built facility that we can. With that goal, though, it made us question wait, what is the ideal? So I looked. So for us, was the ideal international practice. It was making us a bit nervous because of these, very practical realities we have in our collection. And so, and in an age of climate change and a climate crisis, we didn't want to be so reliant, or we want to minimize our HVAC use as much as possible, as it today is still our greatest carbon footprint as an institution. So, in revising guidelines, my objective really, and this is revising guidelines for the new facility that we're going to build, um, was to minimize mechanical inputs for climate control without compromising the safety of our objects in its care, integrating passive strategies where possible. The methodology that I took on was the methodology described this morning. I evaluated the environmental history of the Lopez Museum and Library collection, looking not just at environmental data, but also the climate controls of the building. It's also important to look at the structure that the collection was housed in. And then I examined the collection to assess the impact on the collection condition for specific for specific areas. I was looking for microbial, so mold, mechanical and chemical deterioration, aspects that are affected by incorrect temperature and incorrect humidity. And I also identified environmental needs moving forward, depending on how the collection was actually used. So these were our indoor climate controls at the Benpress building. This is a floor plan of our ground floor, as well as one of our storage floors. We in this data set that I'm showing you, we had already had 24-hour climate control at the time, but it was really convoluted. It was an old building from well, I shouldn't say old, but it was an older building from the 1980s that had centralized air conditioning, which kind of wasn't enough. So on top of the centralized air condition, which was only during office hours, we had independent units built into each storage space, plus portable dehumidifiers in the room. So it was a very layered sort of control structure. This is all included in my article that is part of the resource handout. So if you'd like to examine it further, please feel free to check it out. And the way that we monitored at the time was manual. We had an 𝐂𝐻𝐿SEC handheld monitor where we'd go into a room, take a measurement twice a day. And we also had these thermal hygrometers inside the cabinetry, which you see in the picture above, which actually we didn't really write down. For those, it was more of an alert. Our facilities team knew that if they saw, 75%, etc., to call us because there's a possibility of mold. So we weren't really in the nature of really being very close to the data. But nevertheless, our results show that we were relatively consistent. So I'm just going to go back a few slides to identify something that I think is important. What was fantastic about the Benpress building was it was poured concrete, which means it was really insulated well, and we didn't have any windows into the structure. So even if we had maybe we only had dehumidifiers during the day. When we'd come into work the next morning, it wasn't really such a drastic change. And you can see this in our data. Our data over a 5-year period is represented in blue here. And you can see that you have temperature along the bottom, and I have it presented against our historic targets, which our Maita Reyes had made for us, which were 22 plus or minus 3 degrees centigrade and 60 plus or minus 5%. You can see that we were well within our temperature target, but well above the humidity target, but still oddly consistent. So you can see it's not really spread out that much. In fact, if you look at the frequency of our relative humidity per level, humidity level per collection area, you can see these large overlaps. So while we were high, we're actually not fluctuating all that much. We are fluctuating plus or minus 5%. And for us, we think that because we didn't record after hours when the dehumidifiers were off, but we think that it didn't even reach 10%. And I wanted to show that what we found in our assessment was quite consistent with the theoretical tools that Vincent presented earlier. And for that, we really see the value in it. What we saw was that there was no real significant damage to our paintings. So this is a painting by Omar Solo that I tried to zoom in so you could see the surface. And as you can see, there's really not much cracks or anything. It's really quite stable. So the paintings were actually quite fine at the targets, even if we were above our own targets. But what was really suffering was our library materials. There was a lot of acid hydrolysis. And I'm sure those of you that work with paper-based materials see this as well. Browning, brittleness. You can see that. I think some librarians tried to keep all the pieces together by taping the pages, which we were able to restore later. So what this meant was And then what I should mention is there were, of course, periodic incidences of mold. I think that truly is our biggest reality here in the tropics, and that we're constantly trying to manage. So for us, we really wanted to keep our levels below 70% because we find that that's generally like the germination zone. But within that, as sort of our maximum, because we were trying not to be so heavy on our air conditioning and dehumidifying, we were trying to see how high, how close to 70% we could go with our new parameters for the storage. For the paintings, it was clear that, you know, it was quite fine. We could go to the maximum and keep a range from 65 to 70. But our concern, as I showed earlier, was our library. Um, and this slide, for us, was quite important. It's taken from Mikalski, also from the CCI, and it shows different categories of chemical stability, lifetimes, similar to what um, Vincent presented. But it also I've includes the types of materials, just in case it might be relevant to you also. For us, we traverse all of these. We have very high chemical stability materials, parchment, vellum, rag paper, and majority of our collection was medium stability, as Vincent suspected, mildly acidic papers, most black and white photographs. But we did have some low chemical stability items. So we have a large newsprint collection that's really quite sensitive. Um, that can't really always be handled. So I took on this approach by Mikalski, also from CCI, where they have studied multipliers, lifetime multipliers of papers. And it shows you, okay, if you store it at certain humidity or temperature, what does it mean to the life and particularly the acid hydrolysis degradation mechanism? And I think all of us have limitations on resources. And so when thinking about museums, all of us are like, oh, that has to last for generations and generations. But what does that mean? How forever is forever? For it to last long and, triple the lifetime, is that something we could really support? Did we really want to be lowering our conditions that far? At Lopez, we kind of capped it. For us, I felt that 100 years could be a target rather than centuries and centuries into the future, because that's what we could realistically sustain. And also, we're very hopeful and confident in future conservators to find future technologies that might prolong it further. So for us, we think 100 years is just fine. And what I've included here is to show the targets that we adjusted. So our 20th century, what we ended up doing different from Ben Press is we separated the materials into different storage units. We used to have paintings together with our most sensitive library materials. We now have two separate storage units for that. So we did a reorg of our of the way that we care for collections, but not so far as to disrupt the librarians. So we do have some, newsprints next to rag paper works. We kind of did the best we can, so they can still very easily retrieve the materials. And I thought I'd share our programming and use. For us, we're building two sites. So we completed the site in 2019, and the first site is an offsite storage from which selected works are exhibited. So majority of our collections actually is in storage, and that's why we concentrated so much on the needs of the storage facility. For exhibition programming, we have a separate space where works will be there temporarily and will continue to include contemporary art commissions. I kind of highlight this because contemporary art material needs are so varied and have very different requirements to our collection needs. And that we would also be participating in a lot of domestic loans. And most of the people that we borrow from do not come from very controlled spaces. So we didn't want to also put their objects at risk. And our exhibitions are to expand to international loans. So what we did was we created zones rather than choosing one set point tailored to our most sensitive materials. We tried to maximize where we could. So we are designating an international loan gallery, so it's only limited to one space, and that's the only space that can support the Bizot protocol. And for collections to be loaned locally and internationally, we decided to take on risk on an object level. So right now, for our artworks, we're quite happy to keep our RH level at 65 plus or minus 5. For 16th to 19th century books, maps, manuscripts, and Risaliana, I highlight this because of, as Vincent mentioned, prior to the 1850s, the quality of the materials are much better. And so they can sort of withstand. And for that, we put them at 18 plus or minus 2. You'll notice a change in temperature. We find that it's cheaper to adjust temperature than to adjust humidity. And it goes a long way, as you saw from the previous graph, which I explain more in my paper. For 20th to 21st century books, 20, 60 plus or minus 5, these are the medium stability materials. 20th to 21st century photographs, clippings, the same, but a little bit cooler. You see the 18 degrees. And for objects, we put at 65 plus or minus 5, it's fine, as well as all collection handling zones. And we made a provision that if the International Gallery is being used locally and we don't have an international loan, then we would just use our broad collection zone handling zone of 65 plus or minus 5. Now, one thing I wanted to share that of added dimension is, okay, so now here we are raising our humidity. What then happens with loans? As I mentioned, we have a very active loans program. So at Lopez, what we do is we take this on from an object level. This is an example of an artwork traveling between the Philippines and North America. We tend to place loggers in like 3 areas. We place one outside the crate, so we know what's happening outside. One, we do a double chamber design. So we have one in the interior chamber and one in the exterior chamber. The artwork, of course, is in the interior chamber. And we do this. This is how we know when we can open a crate. This once when we're doing the acclimatization process in the receiving gallery, we know when we can open it when it's matched the gallery. But more importantly, what I wanted to show is that when we do our loans, which might be helpful to those of you that do too, we do a pre-acclimatization process. So for this that traveled, although our conditions are at 65, we actually lowered we packed the artwork in a dryer room where we lowered the conditions for a few days prior to packing and transport so that the artwork wouldn't be so shocked by the change. Just a small caveat to that, though, is sometimes it's really important. What I've found it's to figure out to what point you acclimatize the work, like how much you dry it before it leaves. It's so important to communicate with the registrar of the borrowing institution and to kind of get a sense. And because sometimes there are discrepancies in facility reports than what they might actually transpire. And so I want to share that in this example, even if we had pre-acclimatized the work, the galleries, as you can see here in light blue, this is the borrower. Although their facilities report was to 45 plus or minus 5, it actually went all the way down to 30%. And so this caused some damage, like just some mechanical damage, such as these cracks that you can see in the paint film. So transit is something also to consider with this great disparity. But a solution, perhaps if the work also is of a reasonable size, is to just microclimate the artwork. This is something that we did recently at our exhibition at Iloilo. The exhibition is in a heritage building that was constructed by Juan Arellano, beautiful building that used to be the old city hall. And we did our exhibition in a room that had all exterior walls and windows. But I think it's so important to be sensitive to the venue and space, and with the mindset of sustainability, keeping our mechanical controls low. We also didn't want to impose on the structure and put all crazy aircon and everything, or additional aircon and dehumidifiers. So what we decided to do was just intervene on a local level. We sealed in the environment that we have in our storage, and that enables us to have the works on loan there. And what this graph shows is the readings. We put a logger outside the gallery and inside the gallery. So outside the gallery is in black, and inside the gallery is this sort of teal color. And what you can see is inside the gallery is very close to outside the gallery. It's kind of overlapping, which is something we sort of expected, but also wanted to track. But what you can also see, we put an example of 3 loggers. We put loggers in the microclimate frames. Is that they're also steady. So even if it's getting really hot and humid outside and in the gallery space, our paintings are fine. And it's really like a low cost way of making artwork more accessible. I think it's always a balance between preservation and access. And as a museum, we really want our artworks to be out there as much as possible. And as a museum that has so much in storage, we don't want conservation to be a barrier towards access and loans. Um, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Just a few acknowledgements. I just wanted to thank, of course, our director who couldn't join us today, 𝐂𝐍𝐈𝐍𝐍, conservation consultant, 𝐿𝐿𝐼𝐻 Reyes, and also the Lopez Museum Library Conservation, Collections, Library, and Facilities team, all of whom participate in preventive conservation in our institution. I want to acknowledge 2. We have with us today Isabel. If you want to stand and wave, she's our registrar. And also Gab next to her, our facilities manager, who I rely on so much to carry out a lot of the work that we do. Thanks very much. And if you want to see the show, it's till the 25th.
And we still have a closing remark. So maybe call on Marga for a closing message on behalf of the Lopez Museum and Library.
Thank you, Nina. I'll keep this brief. I know it's been a long day. I just wanted to thank you all so much for coming. We thought that we would be ambitious having 2 days of symposium, and we're really quite touched to see so many people in the room. And I hope you feel you can reach out to us and took down our emails and contact information. And, as we draw, I hope this has been insightful and maybe even thought-provoking for those that are working in collections. I thought I'd take a moment to reflect on the rich discussions and valuable insights that were shared. We've heard from Vincent, and as you saw from his very rich experience, he is one of our leading experts in the field of environmental management. And he really went out of his way to be here today to make the symposium happen. So I just want to thank you again, Vincent. He flew here from LA, but it's actually meant to be in China next week and managed to create this project. Vincent, your guidance and expertise has been such great impact to the work that we do. I think Camille and I are just small examples, and we couldn't be more grateful that you have come here today to help us and work with us directly. Camille, thank you so much for your presentation today. Um, it's so wonderful how you are able to approach and be completely open with us through your process. I think it has been so relatable, and it really helped me see aspects of collections that are so different from my own. I'm hoping that the both case studies that we presented today show that what works in temperate climates does not always work for us here in the Philippines, where it's much more humid and much warmer, and that there is no one size fits all strategy. I think all of us here as collection care professionals are just wanting to do the best that we can and preserve these important heritage materials that are going to live far beyond our own selves. I wanted to extend my deepest gratitude and congratulations as well to the organizing team today, particularly DG Barnes, of course, Geralda Legaspi, who stayed with us the whole day. Thank you. I know how busy you are. To Rosette, thank you, Rosette. Noel, thank you. The RCCMD, Camille, of course, Nina, Marites Taro, and the Ethnology Division, and as well as Audrey, who is our colleague in Cebu. We wish you well and hope that this has been a useful session. Best of luck with your efforts. Thank you.